Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this lunchtime session where we are looking at Transport Data Action Plan that was released by the department a few weeks ago now. I'm Tim Rivet, and I'm going to be running through this with you. We are recording this, and the slides and recording will be made available to you all in the next couple of days. So what we will do is we will have a quick run through the action plan, bringing out some of the key themes and actions, and then get into what I think the implications are for bus data from it, and some of the things that are missing, perhaps, that we might want to address, and some of the big issues that we might want to pick up. And then, as ever, time for questions. Do feel free to use the chat as we go along. I'll pick things up at the end. So Transport Data Action Plan doesn't sit in isolation. It's not really a standalone document. It builds on the Transport Data Strategy that was released in 2023. That was a strategy. This is the plan. So, in many ways, in a classic hierarchical, you'd go, well, we need to look to the strategy to see how it all fits together. That is right in some regards. You also need to look at the very recently released Better Connected Integrated National Transport Strategy to understand some of the context and things like that. And needs to look at the wider government's policies around economic growth and the drive for that. What's going on with digital transformation across government and many industries. If we look at it just in isolation, then we don't really get the full picture. But in the plan, it sets out some core purposes. It's really focusing, picking up what's in the Integrated National Transport Strategy and the data strategy, but focusing on how to share transport data, how really it ought to be able to be accessed and used across the piece. This is not a mode-specific plan, and because of that, it's in quite a lot of ways quite generic, but it is all about how you get data from where it is created into the hands of the public through one means or another, because this is where it links into the strategies. It's all about how you get people making more journeys, more bums on seats, how you get more economic growth through innovation and efficiencies. It sets out a strategic vision for data, which is fundamentally trying to achieve how you move from the current position of things all over the place. If you want to know what data's available, that's actually really quite hard to achieve, because you have to look in lots of different places, and how you move to a more joined up, integrated data ecosystem. Horrible word, ecosystem, but that's the language that it uses. How it all fits together into something with 5 key themes, which we'll dig into a little bit more. So, 5 key themes, as I say, the first being data sharing and access. So how do you help people find out and know what data's out there? If you want rail, you've got the rail digital marketplace. They're talking about introducing a transport data marketplace. If you're wanting bus data, you go to BODS. If you want traffic or roadworks data, you might go to Street Manager. But you need to know these things, and they're not always easily exposed and found. To help with the sharing aspects of it, moving to an API first access. We'll pick up on this later, but in the bus sector, there's an awful lot of files that get moved around to share data rather than APIs. So that's the first thing to think about and how it impacts bus. There's a push on standards and quality, trying to use more consistent standards that work together more and allow easier integration, which will help with the focus that it starts to bring on quality and reliability of data. It's all very well. You might have a perfect data set, but if it's not updated reliably, then it's not very useful. So there's a push on that consistency of keeping up to date and things like that as well. Skills and culture. These are really interesting, these 3, which is why they're sort of separated out. The first 2, they're sort of more hard things and solid things that you might go, yeah, okay, I can see, we need to, focus on a strategy. Well, hey, there's a document that sets that out. You can measure it. You can monitor it. You can count the number of people using it because you've been able to achieve greater accessibility. These 3 are the sort of the softer aspects of data, but arguably the things that need the most addressing in many ways. So skills and culture. So how do you get to the point where people actually really understand how to use data, where it is, what is their role within the whole process and things like that. How many people actually really understand TransExchange, let alone NetX and GTFS and DTRO standards that we were looking at last week. So how do you drive that skills and culture piece? Which will help with the first 2. User needs and communications. So, yes, how do you make sure people know that there is data available, but actually what's it being used for? What data do passengers actually want? There's not actually any real prime research in bus in the UK. Something that I was talking to Campaign for Better Transport about this morning. Actually, what information do people need at different points in the journey? Well, if we don't know that, how do we know what data sets we ought to be collecting and the quality and latency and cadence issues associated with that data? And then how do you, when you've worked out what people actually want and you're making it available, how do you make sure that people know where they can use it? So how do you promote the services that you provide as an operator, as authority, and as a end user, website or app supplier. So promotion to help people make journeys better, more reliably, and have more confidence in what they're doing because the information is up to date, including disruptions and things like that. And then the bit that's often forgotten, all of the governance stuff around data. How do you make sure that it's trustworthy and secure? For a lot of what we move around in the bus world at the moment, you go, so what if a timetable gets leaked to the public? Well, it's it's already being openly available, but when you start to think about some of the other data sets that might be needed, particularly when you get talking about ticketing and more, personal profiles and things like that, that trust and security starts to play a major role. And from a governance point of view, what do you do to destroy the data? What controls are in place within an organisation to make sure that it's maintained correctly and things like that. So some really interesting things that have been included that haven't really had a lot of focus in the past, but are quite difficult, but will have a big impact, hopefully. So once you've set out themes and your overall strategic vision, you need to get onto the nitty gritty of actually what you're going to do. Remarkably, they've managed to distill what could have been a huge long list of actions into 11 key actions. They are quite high level. Things like creating a transport data standards framework. That's a big bit of work. They've not shied away from, hard things, but they are quite high level. And so, there's going to have to be a lot of stuff underneath it. And they're all trying to, target a few key sort of headline outcomes. So, more use of AI for accessibility and inclusivity. Account-based ticketing gets a bit of a mention. Public transport tracking, although they probably will tick that box, given the recent fact that Google are starting to use location data from BODs, but some big things that will make a difference to passengers are sort of at the end of these actions once they've been achieved. So what does it try and aim to deliver? So it is actually quite interesting to read the story. They've got the story down quite well. How you get from very high strategic fluffy stuff to practically what does this mean? So multimodal journeys, making those easier. Yeah, that's a good tick. More real-time passenger information and, importantly, disruptions. So expect more of a focus on cancellations and diversions and other disruption stuff. How you then use that live data into better efficient planning and network management, because you're going to be supporting more use of AI and other similar tools to help drive innovation. And so it does tell that story quite well as a document. it won't put you to sleep. So it then sets out a bit of a delivery approach. It is very strong on collaboration, recognizing the fact, or recognizing to a degree, I think I will say, fact that actually there is a role to play for central government. You know, they need to be set in the overall context and some of the frameworks and standards, but you can't do it without local authorities, and you can't do it without private operators. And in the context of the action plan, yes, we might see operators and think that's somebody that's driving a bus around, but actually, because it's mode agnostic in terms of transport, those private operators from the plan perspective include ticketing companies, they include parking suppliers and parking operators, and that sort of thing. So, you know, at the widest sort of definition of operator, and unlike the strategy, which didn't really reflect it properly, it does recognise that the data that's going to be necessary to achieve the plan is spread out across many organisations, and so the coordination aspect of it is quite important, which is why 3 of those themes are sort of the softer stuff, the stuff that's going to bring people together, develop the skills and get people working together. So the quick view of the world, I think, is that there's not a lot in there about new data infrastructure and, you know, putting in place lots of servers and things like that, but it's more about how you fix things so that data flows from one place to another more smoothly and easily than it does at the moment, by making sure that it's usable, by working with the end passenger. What do they want? How do we get it? And how do you open up those data sources if they're not already open? And how do you make sure that those data sources are standardized so you can actually use it without a significant amount of effort? Because only when you've got data that is easily consumed, it's easily available, do you get some of the innovations that we saw 20, 15, 10 years ago, that might make a difference to the wider economy, because we want that customer and that passenger experience to be much better, because if it isn't, then people are more likely to drive their cars and things like that. So yeah, the quick headline is it's more about the plumbing than anything else, which means that it is actually probably quite achievable. And there is a table at the back of things that the department is planning to do off the back of it. Some of those are already underway, so they'll be familiar to you if you take a look at them. So that's a very quick run through of the action plan. What does it mean for bus and bus data in particular? So first off, NAPTAN, it's quite heavily referenced in the plan. It recognised that it is if you don't know where you can get on and off transport modes, then you can't use those modes. So it does recognise quite well the role that NAPTAN has to play in everything, but it is also recognised that structurally, it's 25 years old now. It's not substantially changed over those years, and there are things that could quite easily be done to improve the governance and the usability of it, making sure it's properly maintained and things like that. And for those of you that are long in the tooth, you might remember in the early days of NAPTAN, there was an awful lot of work done on more tightly defining some of the rules around some of the data elements in NAPTAN. Over the years, most of those have sort of drifted away as there's been less focus from the centre. But I think that we will see more focus on more tightly defining some of the bits of data and things like that to make it more consistent across the country. So when people move from one area to another, they don't have to relearn how stops are named, or whether somebody uses landmarks and things like that. And so that's all to the good, but it's going to be quite challenging, I suspect. And because of that, local authorities are likely to have a bit more of a push towards making sure that data is up to date, and investing in the data, and quite possibly structures and formats and things like that, because at the moment NAPTAN is very much file based, where actually these days, if you were redoing it, you would design it with APIs, and rather than having to download the lot and then work out what's changed, just give me everything that's changed in the last day or week or whatever. So quite a lot of potential over the next few years to be turning it into something a bit more dynamic rather than just a static database or set of files. So once you know where you're getting on and off, you want to know whether the bus is going to turn up and things like that, along with lots of other data sets. There's quite a heavy focus on moving towards more live data. What's happening here and now? Is the car park full? Is the bus on time? And how do you get from the current situation where, in theory, every bus is tracked? We haven't quite got that with trains yet. But what about trams? What about other modes? How do we start to get more live data from other modes, not just bus? That's not saying there's not a lot of work to do with bus to get more consistency and improve things. But this is a multimodal action plan. More standardization. There's a bit of inconsistency with some of the data that's available from operators and authorities. So how do we standardize that more? That's particularly looking at non-bus stuff, where there is not that much standardization. But from our perspective, includes some interesting stuff around predictions and accuracy of them. How do we make sure that the information that the passenger is receiving is best quality, and more detailed things like, making sure that timetables and real time match, making sure that the bus isn't just reporting, every 30 seconds. It's quite easy to see how things will shift to needing a much more high frequency set of updates, and not just that cadence stuff, but actually, that data is no good if it takes 30 seconds to get from the bus to the passenger. How do you make sure that latency across all of the systems is as low as possible? Something that there was a bit of focus on in Transport for the North a few years ago, that sort of transferred into a national scheme that's sort of all been a bit quiet and gentle, but disruption stuff is the thing that passengers are increasingly saying is higher up their priority. So focus on disruptions, not just for bus, but everywhere else. How do you make that more machine readable rather than just a text? Because a lot of the information that's out there at the moment is instructions to passengers. How do you make that into a more machine actionable format and structure? And how do you get more of that, because it is more actionable by a machine automatically into journey planners, so it knows the road is closed and so therefore this is the diversion route, and how you then push that out to the bus driver and the passengers on the bus and in apps and things like that. Increasing just purely from the current situation where we've got scheduled bus services to requirements for DRT, active travel stuff, and micro-mobility. So, how do you know that if you're heading for a dockless or a bike rack, whether there is a rental bike available there? How do we make that available? How do we then include that in multimodal journey planning solutions? That sort of thing. There'll be more things that people will be expected to do around making other bits of data available. If you put this into the context of what is in the Bus Services Act and the ability for government to request additional bits of data from operators and authorities, then you can start to see some things that aren't available at the moment starting to become available. From a BODS point of view, it gets some praise. Ministers quite like BODS at the moment because it seems to be delivering. They've got a nice high-profile tick in the box now that the likes of Google are using location data. But there's a focus along with lots of things in the action plan about how you move more towards usability. You've got data, that's very nice. Actually, is it usable? Is it what the passenger wants? So how do you go about making data more available? You can track this back to the actions and the themes that we were looking at. So, how do you make BODS more API friendly and make it easier to consume BODS data? And how do you enforce some of that quality stuff more, making sure that there's better validation and monitoring? And how do you move to a more multimodal set of data? So, if you try to use rail data, whether it's, you want to know where a station is and the facilities at a station, or what's the timetable, or what's the current live data for trains, you're pushed to the rail data marketplace. That's seen as quite a success. And so how do you move from it just being rail data marketplace through to actually a transport data marketplace, so including anything to do with transport, be that road data or public transport data. And then there's some interesting stuff in the action plan around connecting the dots and making things more usable. So breaks down the different roles of different standards and data sets, which is good to see. They've actually listened to how things piece together, and that fits into the wider how do you create a set of standards that is usable and integratable in an easy to use way. But that does mean that there'll be more of a push to make sure that the real time location data matches with what's in the timetable and things like that, so that quality issue and the timeliness issue. The big thing in these things often is what's missing. It's presented in a nice, simple way, but because of that, because it won't put you to sleep, but it misses out a lot of stuff that you would get in a more detailed, harder to read document about, who enforces the changes, how are they made, and importantly, what's the penalty or what's the impact if we don't achieve what's set out in there, because there's not a lot of things that I suspect anybody will disagree with, but there's nothing in there about if we don't achieve this won't happen and this is the impact. There's very little on fares. There's a single reference to fares in the whole document. It talks about wanting to introduce account-based ticketing, but not how that's achieved. And what data that might need and things like that. So that's a bit of a gap in there. I've said quite a lot. There's stuff in there about how passengers might use data, what information they might want, but there's not very much in there about operational use. So how my bus operators and other operators of infrastructure be encouraged to use data to make them more efficient, save money, improve the customer offer, that sort of thing. So how operational stuff, where I'm sure we all know there's lots of low hanging fruit and things like that. That's a bit of a gap. What needs to be done to address some of the commercial and contractual barriers, because a lot of the data that we might want, isn't actually under the control of local or central government. It's controlled by private sector. So, how full is that car park? Is not something that's readily available. Yeah, you can get it from an individual parking provider's app probably these days. But you can't get it on a national system or on a map that gives you that overall picture. There's data that's in the Bus Service Act that the department says it's gonna want to be able to get, but some of that's commercial, and therefore data sharing agreements and contracts are going to need to be put into place. And the biggie, I guess not unsurprising, that it's missing is, what funding is going to be available to the DFT and others to make this happen, and where are the resources coming from? So therefore, my working assumption is that it's going to need to come out of existing budgets. And what's the really challenging stuff in there? So I think there's really positive stuff in there about moving more to thinking about data as an asset. It's been talked about for the last awful long time, at least 20 years. How do you recognise that data has a value? The challenge with that is that, if it has a value and you treat it as an asset, if it's an asset, then it needs maintenance. Yeah, we can all agree with that. But maintenance needs budgets, resources, and a plan on how you're doing that. You'll have that as a local authority if you're maintaining and looking after the road network. You know how you're going to fill in potholes, who's going to do it, where the money's coming from, and things like that. You might not have enough of it, but there is a plan there. But there isn't that for public transport information in the same way. There are just so many stakeholders involved. There's over 1,000 bus operators in the UK. So, if we're going to work with them to improve quality, change the data that's needed and things like that, that's an awful lot of people that needs to be got on board and to do things. There's little in there about the pace of change that's going to be necessary. So there is some urgency in that, they're only looking at a 2030 time horizon, but it doesn't reflect the fact that, there are people out there that are consuming data, that are innovating and trying to do shiny, new, interesting, exciting things, that desperately need a little bit of data from somewhere but can't get it at the moment, and they can move an awful lot faster than everybody else. All those people producing the data can, and so that's something that we're going to have to work out how we're going to address if we're going to support the action plan. If you want to find out more, the action plan is online on government website, of course, and the Catapult has put a useful site together, sort of trying to link a few things together, and that will be developed as more sort of is worked up on individual plans and things like that. So whilst there's not a lot on the site at the moment that you won't sort of glean from reading the plan itself, over time that the Transport Data Action Plan site is going to grow with more content and examples of where things have been done for people to follow and things like that. So that then gets us on to what else do people want to know? What questions have people got? I've seen some stuff in the chat. So, John, biggest gap we have is people with vision that can identify where the bridges need to be built to link silos. So there are conversations already going on, John, about how we develop skills. It's one of the key themes, but there's a few of us in different organisations that are already trying to encourage some concrete work to take place sooner rather than later on that. Another one from John. Yeah, significant errors in NAPTAN, stop locations and things like that. You're absolutely right. That's an area that the NAPTAN team are increasingly aware of. I don't think that there is a simple solution to that, given the devolved nature of it, but the plan does give some levers to the department. Where to find the location data in Google? You haven't been able to find any yet. And Gary's helped out there. Thank you, Gary. And yes, it is only available via the app. It's not on the website. And that was a conscious decision in Google on the basis that you're more likely to be looking at your phone than on your laptop when you're out and about travelling. So, any questions, thoughts, comments from anybody? Chris?
Yeah, so sorry. Hi, it's Chris. So I mean, I think the transport data plan seems like a very good sort of objective for the sector. The thing that maybe I'm slightly confused about, and maybe I don't have enough visibility on it, is that it's okay for the big transport operators, TfL or whatever, or Go Ahead Group to provide the necessary information to enable all of this to happen within a big data marketplace. But, I've been looking at coach companies over the last few days, and there's loads and loads of small coach companies. And they serve all over the country. And at the moment, you get the sort of vibe I'm getting is that they sort of struggle at best to put timetable data onto BODs. So, what I'm thinking is, how are they going to, get it together to provide sort of real-time information onto BODs or what other data marketplace there may be? And is there going to be some sort of legislation that's going to come into force that's going to make them do it by a particular method? And if so, what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah. Yeah, can we leave it to that? But no, I mean, so a few thoughts on that. One of the challenges is with Coach is that the regulations around provision of information are woefully poor. And it's not an area that until fairly recently has had a lot of focus with ministers. Interestingly, over the last few months, there's been a bit more focus on that, and there's been a bit more awareness of quite how important a mode coach is, which is the first time I've really heard that from ministers and senior policymakers in many years. And over the last few weeks, the work by CPT and RHA on the fuel cost issues for the coach sector are actually having more of an impact to raise awareness than anything else has. So I think getting better coach data is going to be a challenge, but I think that there are some opportunities potentially, if the department's brave enough, and I'm having those conversations with them, that the Bus Service Act, whilst it is clearly bus rather than coach, might have some levers in it that will help improve at least some of the regular coach service data availability. And that's the way, using that 2025 Act is how the department would require and mandate operators to provide more data or different data to the information that's currently required for BODs. And so certainly for bus, there's a very clear legislative route. They will be starting to consult on the regulations that they want to put in place to make that happen in the real world very soon. And yeah, there's a whole load of secondary legislation that's going to be enacted to enable some of that over the next couple of years. So there are some levers, but coach will always be a little bit challenging, I suspect. John.
Yeah, I think one of the things that strikes me is that if you want somebody to give something up for you, you really need to show them what they're going to get in return for it. And I think as professionals, we tend not to look at that. Okay, for a lot of things that we're concerned with, DFT has put the regulations in place so that the big boys have to comply. But when we're talking of coaches, of course, we're also talking about basically the school vehicles being used between the peaks and providing services where the proprietor probably thinks, well, everybody in the rural area I'm in knows that I'm here, knows what the coaches are doing. Therefore, do I need to do much more? But of course, the thing is that maybe you could make a killing by getting people to make their shopping journeys using those coach services rather than using the car. And essentially, I think we've got to up our game and say, this is why we want this data, but this is what you're going to get out of it.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think you're right, John. And we have been poor at making that business case that somebody with a commercial hat's going to want, if this data's available, this is, how many more bums on seats we're going to get. Evidence, I think, should be there by now for some of these things. It certainly is anecdotally, but whether there's enough there to make some of the proper cases, I don't know. But there probably is. There probably is, and we just need to make more of it. You're right.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
Can I go back to the other one, which you didn't pick up from the comment I made? The Campaign for Better Transport is seeking to promote a bus stop standard. Now, I think that ties in quite nicely with the fact that a root and branch review of NAPTAN is required. And is there a case for going to DFT together with CBT and others and saying, look, can we have a complete resurvey of all the public transport access points in the UK? And when they recoil at that and say, oh, that'll cost an awful lot, just point out that it's probably still a relatively big drop, admittedly, but a drop in the ocean compared with what they spend on rail and on highways in their annual budgets. So I do think that we've got to start making the case for getting more resources into and better understanding of key things like where do people actually access the network and how do they know about it.
Yeah, that has been discussed in the Campaign for Better Transport Working Group. So it is on people's radar, and it is also on the DFT's radar that they might need to do something. Dan?
It's kind of following on a little bit from what John just said and coach data as well. I think, and this kind of, as I kind of understand the action data plans, there's no new budget to do this kind of stuff. But I think sometimes someone, either at the department or sometimes they just have that kind of ownership of the data and be prepared to not automate everything. I think there's a big thing with all of this stuff about automation and getting people to do stuff. But sometimes you need someone just to create that timetable using the online tool on behalf of a smaller operator or something like that. And, with coaches, when we did it for many, many years, that's what we did. We'd scrape websites and we'd create the coach data from PDFs. And then I had spent many an hour manually coding an ATCO SIF file in a notepad file to be able to produce that. It is not fun, but we did it because that's why we had that ownership of a contract to provide that. And my concern with this data action plan is that it's still going to rely on automation. And we've relied that on BODs and timetable data. And as I always say on every meeting that I ever go to, our compliance is still not above 80% on producing scheduled timetables. The Google Maps example here is another example where I think only 60% of operators that are providing AVL data. We've still got a 40% gap in the market of AVL data for England only as part of it. And my worry is we're trying to do so much more stuff without trying to fix the foundations of, how to ensure we get all the data into the system. And then, how do we aid these smaller operators that, sometimes it's one person who drives the bus and runs the timetable. How do we move that burden for them getting the data on it? And actually, if the department had a team of people that actually just manually created that data, it would be a much better experience for everyone else, in my view. And that's,
Yeah. Good points, Dan. Yeah. Okay. If there's nobody else, we said that as part of this, there's going to be a bit of a push towards more disruption data. On that theme, in 3 weeks' time, something like that, we've got Lothian Buses who are going to be talking about what they do in Edinburgh to manage disruptions and communicating with the passengers. So sign up on the website for that if that's of interest. And given nobody else has got their hands up and there's nothing more in the chat, I will bring this to a close. And if you didn't know how to get hold of me or colleagues in RTIG, then contact details are on the screen. Thank you for your time this lunchtime. Hope you found it useful, and see you all again soon. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this lunchtime session where we are looking at Transport Data Action Plan that was released by the department a few